And we are live. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Offsetting Penalties Podcast. We are live right now after, and I mean after, UFC 324. The Paramount era is over. Recording this 10:45 p.m. Pacific time. Card wrapped up about an hour ago. Fun card. Main event was chaos. Look at how unprofessional that was. I had Figgy and Umar on screen. I apologize. Unbelievable card. Way to kick off the Paramount era. A little underwhelming on the main card side of things, but it wasn't going to be perfect. There were some bad fight dropouts. One notably that we'll talk about a little later with Michael Johnson and Alexander Hernandez, and yeah, let's just jump straight into it. Before we do, if you're here live, I appreciate you. If not, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow on Spotify, follow on Instagram, follow on TikTok. We're growing this thing, getting a lot of love and support. I say it every time. I appreciate it a lot. And yeah, let's jump straight into it. So the main event, it was wild, man. It was wild. Justin Gaethje is the interim lightweight champion of the world right now and is set to fight Ilia Topuria. I don't know how that's going to go. I'll talk about that a little later. Let's focus on the fight first. He wins 3-2 on one scorecard, 4-1 on the other two. And it was a fight that Gaethje they kept saying it on the broadcast, it looked like the old Justin Gaethje. It looked like the Justin Gaethje that kind of threw caution to the wind, was reckless, throwing everything and every shot. And as Justin Gaethje's gotten a little later into his career, the Poirier fight, the Fiziev fights, Gaethje's become a guy who's still embracing the chaos, but he's brought it down to 70-80% and just been a little more calculated. And it felt like in this fight there was none of that. It felt like he did not respect anything Paddy Pimblett was throwing his way, and he was going to walk Paddy down. And it was evident because he was getting hit by Paddy a lot in this one, especially with the leg kicks. Everyone talks about how good Gaethje's leg kicks are, but no one talks about how good Paddy's leg kicks were, and Paddy's leg kicks were a big factor in this fight. But it really felt like the only weapon that Paddy really had that did any sort of damage or impact towards Justin Gaethje. It was Gaethje on the front foot the entire fight, and that's what it came down to. And that's so many of these UFC fights, man. So many MMA fights, it comes down to who's the front foot fighter. Who's the fighter that's getting backed up to the fence, and who's the fighter that's the one backing you up to the fence. And for this fight, that was Justin Gaethje. So a lot of people are going to walk away from this fight and think to themselves, Paddy Pimblett didn't shoot any takedowns, needed to, and I agree. I'm in complete agreement. But the issue wasn't the fact that he wasn't shooting takedowns. The issue was the fact that he was on the back foot all along the fence line the entire fight, and you just can't shoot takedowns that way. So it really became partially a footwork thing, partially maybe throwing too much respect towards Gaethje's power. But at the end of the day, right, if you're getting back to the fence, you're just asking him to throw bombs at you. And that's what Gaethje did. From round 3 on, it felt like Gaethje was just winging his right hand, throwing it with everything, and it was landing. I got to give Paddy some credit. The whole Scousers don't get knocked out thing, there's some credit to it because Gaethje was battering this dude up and he was eating him on the chin. And it felt like every time it looked like, oh, Gaethje could finish Paddy here, Paddy weathered the storm and came back and did brilliantly. So I got to give Paddy Pimblett a lot of credit for just staying in this fight. There were many occasions, including in round 1. I honestly thought Gaethje, that was the closest he came to the knockout in this fight, was in round 1 when he knocked Paddy down. And it was incredible, and it looked like Paddy maybe went out for a half second. That's at least how it looked to me when I was watching it live. And it was really, 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 really entertaining. But at the same time, it's, Paddy every time would come back and made it a fight. And this wouldn't have been as fun of a fight as it was if it wasn't for Paddy Pimblett being tough, man, being really, really tough. And this isn't something we've seen from Paddy in his career. A lot of his opponents he's walked through, had really good performances against. Obviously he got a little hairy against Jared Gordon. Everyone references that fight. A little hairy against Tony. But this was the first real adversity of Paddy's UFC career. And he lost the fight, but he was able to weather the storm and fight through it. And I think he cemented his name, Paddy cemented his name as okay, He's ranked number 5 in the lightweight division. After he beat Chandler, he was ranked number 10, and he just mysteriously kept climbing up the ranks. I think it's safe to say he is a top 5, top 6 lightweight currently. I think that's safe to say. But in this one, it was a matter of, this was a striking match, and Gaethje was the one who had the meaner intentions and threw the meaner shots and the harder shots. Because at the end of the day, Patty was landing, especially with the jab. In round 4, the jab was really working for Patty, or round 3, excuse me. But Patty was, Patty, when he would throw the winging right hands, because he was throwing those too, it just wouldn't have the impact on Gaethje like Gaethje's did have on Patty's. And that's partially because Patty was on the back foot. It's harder to generate power that way. I thought Patty's leg kicks were really, really good. I thought his jab, especially in round 3, was really, really good, but it felt like those weapons were weapons that were needing to set up more destructive weapons, more destructive shots, and those never came. With Gaethje, it was only destruction. It was only straight machinery, and it was a classic Justin Gaethje performance. Throwing caution to the wind, walking out there, walking you down, getting hit, but throwing caution to the wind, and just, that's what makes Gaethje so scary, is even at this point in his career, he throws nukes, he throws caution to the wind, and he toned it down a little bit in recent fights, but in this fight he did not. He went back to his old ways, and, that was the difference. Now, let's talk a little long-term with Justin Gaethje here. Really good performance against Patty. Really, really good performance. I don't want to, Gaethje, awesome performance. I don't want to take away from his moment and him winning the interim belt or anything, but I couldn't be the only one watching that fight and thinking to myself, Ilia Topuria is going to murder whoever wins this fight. And it ended up being Gaethje, and Gaethje was getting hit a lot in this fight. And from Patty, who, isn't the most powerful striker and was on the back foot a lot of the fight, okay, you can walk through those shots. That's not going to work against Ilia, right? We saw Charles try to be a front foot fighter against Ilia, and we saw how that went in round 1. And I just think Ilia, if you're going to trade with Ilia, you better be just on your P's and Q's when it comes to defense, and that is not what Justin Gaethje is known for. So I worry for the sake of Justin Gaethje's health that this Ilia Topuria matchup is going to happen sooner than later, because I just don't see how he's going to get through it. And going past that, my biggest complaint with this fight before it, right when it got booked, and I think a lot of people thought similarly, was this should not have been for an interim belt. Okay, I would have had no problem with this being just a 5-round main event for a pay-per-view, no belt on the line, right? Especially once Amanda and Kayla, once that fight fell through, I would have had no problem with that. And what ended up happening is we watched this fight, and it was an unbelievably fun fight, but it was sloppy. There was eye pokes, there was nut shots, there was guys just getting bleeding, slipping all over the place. It was not a very technical fight. And when you've got a guy like Ilia who's so dangerous and so technical, and that's who's going to fight the winner of this fight, that was my issue with it, was I didn't feel like these two guys, whoever won the fight, would have been the rightful contender to fight Ilia next. Now they have to, because that's what happens. The interim belt fights the undisputed belt. Hear that, John Jones? That's how it works. And does anyone, please leave in the comments. Let me know. Do you have any confidence in Justin Gaethje taking out Topuria? I don't. I do not. And then you look at the rest of the lightweight division. You've got Arman ranked number 1, right? Arman would probably beat Gaethje. I think most people would agree with that. Arman is a much more dangerous fighter than Patty is. He holds much more power in his hands and is a much more refined grappler. Patty's got great jiu-jitsu, but the wrestling isn't exactly what he's super comfortable doing. Arman's A++ wrestler. So, you've got Arman sitting there. He's ranked number 1. You've got Max sitting there, and I get Max got booked in March to fight Charles Oliveira for the BMF title, and I love that fight. But am I the only one who's not forgetting about Max Holloway? Max Holloway at lightweight has looked unbelievable. We saw what he did to Gaethje, who's now the interim champion, over Max, right? And then we saw what Max did to Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier, who was a fighter who was still as dangerous as ever in the later parts of his career, and he dispensed of him pretty easily, winning that fight 4-1, even potentially 5-0. And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, how is Max Holloway being forgotten in this? Like, the dude is undefeated at lightweight. He's looked as dangerous as he ever has in his 2 fights at lightweight. And let's not act like he didn't have the best performance of everyone against Ilya, right? Like, Ilya, in this later stage in this more recent stage of his career, in which he's fought Volk, Max, Charles, Josh Emmett, the guy who did the best against him was Max. Max was fighting a pretty good fight and ended up getting clipped. And looking back at that fight, a lot of that had to do with the weight cut for Max. Max was a big 145er as it was, but him taking time to bulk up for the Gaethje fight, fighting Gaethje, and then coming back down to 145 against Ilya, there's a world where 155 is Max's like division. And this is where we could see the best version of Max in his entire career. And he's being forgot about in the lightweight ranks, which is absolutely wild to me. So to think that Armin's sitting there, Max is sitting there, and then I get Charles just got knocked out by Ilya. I understand that. But Charles has beaten Gaethje. So this was my issue with this being the interim title fight, is Gaethje winning this. Now he's ahead of 3 people in the rankings, Armin, Charles, and Max, 2 of which have wins over him already. And one of them, Armin, most 99% of people you talk to would favor Armin in that fight against Gaethje. So that's why lightweight's in a little bit of a mess here. This fight was unbelievable for entertainment value. Unbelievable for entertainment value. I had no issues with them booking this fight as the first fight on the Paramount card. I just hated that it was for an interim title. And now that you're putting Gaethje into this title fight with Ilya that he's more than likely going to lose, that really, really makes things weird for Armin, for Max, for Charles, especially whoever wins that Max Charles fight here in a couple months in March. It really throws things into a loop. So, we talked about this when this fight got booked. I talked about it in the lead up. It being for an interim title really makes things unfair at lightweight, to be honest. Now, to be fair, in Gaethje's, defense, Gaethje knocked out Poirier, and then Poirier beat BSD, and Poirier got a title shot. So maybe this is overdue, and maybe Gaethje needed his title shot at some point to make things all fair. But Armin, I get he's in the bad graces of the UFC, and if it's going to take another win or 2 for him to get there, you know what? I'm not Dana. I'm not Hunter. Okay, that's fine. But Max and Charles are both more deserving than Gaethje. And I'm not saying Charles is deserving. He just got knocked out by him. But let's say Max beats Charles, right? Beats Charles for the BMF belt handedly. Are you telling me that Justin Gaethje should be higher in the rankings fighting for a belt over Max Holloway, who has a win over Gaethje, would have a win over Charles if he beats Charles, and has a win over Poirier? That makes no sense to me. I think Max is being forgotten in all this. I think Armin's being really disrespected by the UFC. I get he's a nightmare to deal with. He headbutted Dan Hooker. He punched the fan. I understand it. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not Hunter or I'm not Dana, so I'm not dealing with this whole thing, the whole Armin situation, but it just makes things weird. Now, of course, if Ilya, who recently said he wanted to be back like April, May-ish, more than likely Ilya is going to be White House card, I would imagine, just considering he's probably the UFC's biggest star right now. With Ilya, if he's out longer than he's saying, and they do an interim title fight, Gaethje versus Armin, or Gaethje versus the winner of Max and Charles, that's fine. I honestly, that would make things things would make a whole lot more sense if that was the case. But yeah. And then really quickly before I move on, in the case of Paddy Pimblett, there has been some serious stuff going on with Paddy and Dan Hooker, some serious beef. Paddy, I forget the lore of it all, but Paddy made a joke about Hooker that Hooker didn't like, so then Hooker brought up one of Paddy's homies who just killed himself, one of the guys he mentioned in the post-fight interview, if I'm not mistaken. I think Paddy versus Hooker, this is the time to do it. I get it would be Hooker fighting up in the rankings a little bit. Actually, okay, Hooker's fighting BSD in a week. So, we'll see. We'll see if Hooker wins. Actually, that could make a lot of sense, Hooker versus Paddy, if Hooker's able to beat BSD. But if not, BSD versus Paddy would not be a bad fight at all, especially if they were to put it in Europe. So, yeah, Paddy will be here for a while. He's still young. He's still in his prime. And Gaethje, this is his final grasp for a UFC belt. He's one of those guys like Poirier who as good as he's been, he's won interim belts and BMF belts. He's just never been able to get the undisputed strap. And it was hard. It was hard to beat Khabib. No one was beating Khabib. No one was beating Charles when Charles was on his run, and no one's beating Elia right now. So tough for Poirier and Justin. And just unless Justin can pull off what most people, including myself, don't believe he can, just tough. So that is that fight. Let's move on to the co-main event of the evening. Sean O'Malley gets the win, unanimous decision, 2-1 on all three judges' scorecards against Song Yadong. And, this was a fight. It was very, very competitive. A lot of people, they're showing the tweets on screen. A lot of people believed that Song Yadong was up 2-0 going into round 3. I think people thought he won round 1 because he got a takedown in the final, 20, 30 seconds of that round. Didn't do a ton with it. But before that, Sean O'Malley was kind of picking him apart on the feet. And as good as Song Yadong fought in this fight, he really could never connect to Sean O'Malley's head. The kicks, especially the leg kicks, were very, very good. And, Song Yadong was throwing with mean intentions the entire fight. But there was never really a point where he had Sean O'Malley rocked or bleeding or anything. It was mostly just damage to Sean O'Malley's leg, which damage is damage. I get it. But it felt like in round 3, Sean O'Malley really put together the best round of the fight and was picking him apart. And, Sean O'Malley, it was a complete performance. Was it a needle-moving performance? I don't think so. But it was a good performance against a good fighter that's very well respected in this division. So, I don't hate it at all. I really don't. But I thought the decision could have gone either way, but I kind of leaned Sean O'Malley in the end. I thought round 1, just, if you take away the bias, it's so easy to judge a round based on what happens in the final 30 seconds, but you take that takedown out of it, that not much was done with it. Sean O'Malley had the crisper round 1. Round 2 was clearly Song. He was bringing the fight to Sean O'Malley, and, the leg kicks were a big issue. You could tell Sean was laboring on that leg a little bit. And I wish more people would do that against Sean because he's so skinny, right? Like he is. You watch it in this one. He had such a height advantage on Song, but you could tell Song had such a muscle advantage on Suga, and that was evident in the takedown Song was able to get, especially that one in round 2 that he was able to control for a little bit. I think it was just a very, very good performance. Very, very good performance by Sean O'Malley, but it wasn't needle moving. And that is the issue right now is, okay, great performance, Sean O'Malley, great performance, but you've got Merab and Peter Yan next, and there's Umar who's also in the conversation. It makes things weird, and we'll talk Umar Figi a little later, but it wasn't like the statement. Like I think if he came out here and knocked out Song Yadong, I think we're talking about undoubtedly if Peter Yan wins, you do Peter Yan versus Sean O'Malley too, and I don't think many people would have complaints. This was a good performance, but it wasn't some dominant needle moving. It was a very close, very competitive fight. I would lean that's more because of Song Yadong being a very good fighter, but you can't put that, Sean O'Malley, it wasn't a divisive. There was many people coming into round 3. There was many people who thought it was 2-0 going into round 3, and many people who probably scored the fight 2-1 to Song. I disagree with that scorecard, but if it was up in the air like that, I kind of get it. What really, to talk about it technically, I'm just talking about it broadly, to talk about it technically, what really was the issue for Song Yadong was Sean O'Malley's footwork. Sean O'Malley, as we know, such a good striker, and part of the reason is the way he's able to cut angles, the way his footwork operates in the octagon, and Song Yadong had trouble with it. He couldn't track him. He couldn't hit him to the head, right? The leg kicks were great, and that's what you have to do against people who move a lot, but he wasn't able to get past that range. He wasn't able to get into that range where he was going to be able to connect with his punches, and it was very evident in that fight. And, the wrestling was a big weapon for Song Yadong, of course, but it just, was a little too late in round 1, and there wasn't any in round 3, and Sean O'Malley had his best round of the fight in round 3, and that was the difference in this one. So, not like a crazy fight by any means. We've seen both these guys being probably better fights, but it was a good back and forth, and it was, good to see Sean O'Malley. I like both these guys. I used to not be super hot on Sean O'Malley. I've kind of warmed up on him now. It seems like he's become humbled a little bit. The Merab losses kind of grew him up a little bit, and he's been he's been just like a more calm. He's not been on social media, and it just felt like in the octagon today, even in the moments when Song Yadong was landing his strikes, it still felt like he was on his P's and Q's with his footwork, with popping the jab, popping the teep kicks, and I thought it was a really good performance by Sean O'Malley. And I don't want to spend too long on it. I don't want to dog on it. I don't think it was needle moving, but I thought it was a very, very solid performance. Let's go heavyweight. Let's talk Waldo Cortez Acosta, coming off of a year where he had 5 fights and went 4-1. He comes in, beats Derek Lewis in a very odd way. It wasn't like another like wild. It wasn't like his Shamil Gaziev or his Antidelia where it was like this one hitter quitter. It was odd circumstances, but I think the reason it got to that point was because of a really good game plan from Waldo Cortez Acosta. It was very clear in this one, him being the younger fighter, him being the lighter fighter. It was very, very clear he had a speed and he had an athleticism advantage in this fight. And Derek Lewis, it just felt like, besides when he was throwing those jumping switch kicks and stuff, just could not really track Waldo Cortez Acosta. He was never really able to hit him with anything. He landed like one right hand in round 1, and that was about it. Waldo Cortez Acosta, it just felt like with the jab, with the low kicks, and with the movement, it kind of frustrated Derek Lewis a little bit. And as we know, Derek Lewis, he's going in there to swing and bang. And it just felt like he couldn't do that in this fight because Waldo was, controlling the octagon and controlling the fight, controlling the dance. And Derek Lewis could just never track him. And eventually, Derek Lewis slipped. And in round 1, when he slipped and was on the ground, Waldo stood him up. In this round, Waldo said, "No, I'm jumping on you." And it just felt like Derek had been frustrated for 8 minutes of octagon time of not really being able to land anything, and kind of accepted the position. And then, a heavyweight gets on top of you and is landing shots on your ear repeatedly. That's going to concuss you, and that's going to put you out, and that's going to stop the fight. And that's exactly what happened. So, a little disappointed to see Derek Lewis like that. I thought, I didn't mind Derek Lewis coming into this fight just because, both these guys are strikers, and, all it takes for Derek is one shot. But I got to give Waldo credit. Waldo's a game planner. It's very, very clear. For a guy who fights a lot, it's very, very clear that he's a guy who's very committed to his game plans. And, we saw it against Robelis Despain a while ago. This was a fight that many people hated from Waldo Cortez Acosta, but he just grappled him the whole fight because he wasn't going to stand with a Taekwondo Olympic medalist, right? And then in his more recent fights, against people that he, knows he has the power advantage of, he lets his hands go and he knocks you out. And this one, he knew that power advantage probably wasn't going to be there, even though he still has plenty of power himself. But he just frustrated Derek Lewis with the game plan and the movement, and I thought it was really good. And, for Waldo, I could really easily see him being one win away from a title shot. Obviously, heavyweight's in limbo right now. We don't know when's Tom Aspinall back. It sounds like he's still recovering from the eye injury. Is Cyril Gane gonna, fight for an interim belt at some point? That's very well in the realm of possibilities. He called out Curtis Blades, and honestly, I don't hate it. The people ahead of him in the rankings, Cyril Gane, who do you imagine next fight, whether it's for an interim belt or a heavyweight or the heavyweight undisputed belt, will be fighting for a belt. Sergey Pavlovich, who was the one loss on Waldo Cortez Acosta's record in 2025. So it's either Volkov or it's Curtis Blades. And he ended up going Curtis Blades with the call out. And this is a guy he had already called out previously. And not only did he already call him out previously, but now he called him out again. And it was a really, really, it was just a good performance by Waldo Cortez Acosta. It was a little weird. It wasn't the one-hitter quitter like we've been seeing in recent fights of Waldo, but it was a good game plan. He frustrated Derek drastically, and it ended up being, in the end, a good, solid win. And he's, a win over Curtis Blades or a win over Volkov. You're looking at maybe the next heavyweight contender, and you know what? No better way to improve than to just continue fighting. This is a guy who's still young into his MMA career, and he's just fought so much in the UFC. He stayed so active that it's helped his case. It's helped his case. So, got to give a ton of praise to Waldo Cortez Acosta in this one. And let's move on to the women. Natalia Silva gets it done. Very similar to the Suga Song fight. A lot of people thought that Song was up. I think a lot of people thought Rose was up in this one, and a lot of people thought Natalia Silva needed to finish. Natalia Silva fought a really good round 3. What impressed me about Natalia Silva today, we knew the karate style, or not the karate, the taekwondo style, just the really like light on the feet, super twitch. She's so twitchy and she's so fast when she throws. She's got a beautiful side kick that she'll oftentimes double up with the same kick, where she'll throw a right kick and then the leg's already out there and then she'll pop out another side kick. I'm trying not to knock my camera off my computer there. I'm trying to throw my side kicks here. And it was awesome. It was awesome to see, especially in round 3. Now Rose, I thought, fought a really intelligent fight, and I knew that coming in. Rose is she's been around the block. She's fought in the UFC forever. She's a former 2-time strawweight champion. She's fought a lot of people, and it just felt like Natalia Silva, it was just skill for skill. She was better than Rose, and Rose came in with a good game plan. A lot of kicks, and that's something that Alexa Grasso didn't do very well against Natalia Silva. And, against people who are very movement heavy, I talked about this with Suga and Song Yadong, that's the way you beat them. Is, okay, you're moving to your left, I'm going to chop your left leg down. You're moving to your right, I'm going to chop your right leg down. And it just felt like, that was Rose's game plan, but Natalia kind of fought through it, continued to land her shots. It was a really, really good victory, and she was promised a title shot. I've got the Dana White press conference right here up on my TV, and he said she's next, and her versus Valentina. I said this when Natalia won back in May of last year on the Montreal card, and I said this when Valentina won in November against Zhang Weili. She hasn't fought Natalia Silva yet. As many different fighters as Valentina Shevchenko has fought, and as many title defenses as she has, this is a new, unique test, and that's what makes it an exciting fight. And Natalia Silva will fight you. I'm curious to see her game plan, her movement, and her twitchiness. Like, how will that translate to 5 rounds? Is it something that she's very comfortable doing for 25 minutes and it can wear on a fighter, or is it something that will slow down going past 15 minutes? To my knowledge, I don't know about before the UFC, but in the UFC, she's never gone more than 15 minutes. So that's something that I'm curious about in that title fight. And obviously, if we end up getting that title fight, I will talk about that then, assuming Offsetting Penalties is still going then, which it will be. Yeah, it was a really, really good performance by Natalia Silva. I don't have many issues with it. I thought it was a close fight. And, to her credit, this was a fight that she jumped in on in relatively short notice. It wasn't long after the fight got announced with Alexa Grasso and Rose that Grasso dropped out and Silva jumped in, but it was still a fight that she wasn't originally booked for against a really tough opponent that is a really, really good game planner who was already booked to fight on this card. And props to her. She could have waited out on a title shot, but she said, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to fight, I'm going to risk it. And she did, and it was a very close fight. And I almost borderline thought maybe Rose won. I had no problem with the decision. If it went to Rose, I would be sitting here, zero problems either. I thought it was a really, really close fight. But a ton of praise to Natalia Silva and a ton of praise to Rose Namajunas. Although the move to flyweight hasn't really been great for Thug Rose. It's been a little hit or miss. It feels like she's beating a lot of the people who are lower in the rankings with people higher in the rankings, like Natalia Silva, like Manon Fior. It just feels like Rose, Erin Blanchfield, Rose has just slightly fallen short. All of them close fights, but just slightly fallen short in all those fights. So, it's clear that she doesn't really have that length advantage that she did at strawweight. And that was a big part of her game. But, she's a vet and she's been around for so long that it makes sense. So, good fight, entertaining fight, high action fight. It got a little stale there for the first 2 rounds, but round 3 it started to turn up a notch. And yeah, now we move on to what they were deeming. I'm not YouTube, Spotify, don't demonetize me, but what they were deeming the battle of autism coming into this fight. And boy, it was that. John Silva beats Arnold Allen. I had no problem with the scorecards. John Silva felt like he was landing the more impactful shots in this one. I mean, this dude right here. The picture of him like at the end, like surfing on Arnold Allen's back. Here's the picture for my people of John Silva doing the Air Jordan jumping off of Arnold Allen for my people on YouTube watching. The dude is hilarious, man. He is so funny and he's so skilled. And I got to give him some credit. What got him caught in the Diego Lopez fight, and what's been the reason a lot of people hate him. I love him, but a lot of the reason people hate him is he's so emotional. He goes from crying to he's really mad to he's laughing and he's screaming and he's barking and he's just a wild man who's very, very emotional. And on the walkout and in the octagon the entire time, the emotions were level. right? A lot of times on the walkout, I could tell it was different because a lot of times on the walkout, he'll get there on the walkout. I've seen him crying on the walkout sometimes. I'll see him like high-fiving fans, taking his time, barking in the middle of the lane that they're walking to the octagon on. And this one, it was stone cold, hood up, I'm ready to fight. And then he was in the octagon and he did a little bit of his shenanigans. He loves dapping up his opponent. Arnold Allen was having nothing to do with it, just nothing to do with it. But it really, in this fight, we saw the least emotional version of John Silva we've seen in the octagon. And I thought that was a good thing. The emotion, gives him that adrenaline and he's able to land these like crazy shots and stuff. I get it. But it also got him caught against Diego Lopez. And that's the Fighting Nerds, right? The Fighting Nerds are a game planning gym. As crazy and as wild as this guy is, he comes from a gym that's very, very smart. They game plan very, very well. And it's very evident when he fights that he always picks up the timing. He always comes in with somewhat of a game plan. Against Diego Lopez, he came in throwing those front kicks immediately, and those were landing the entire duration of that fight against Diego Lopez when they're on the feet. Like, it's very clear this guy is an intelligent fighter. I think it's just hard to see that because he's barking and he's crying and he's just like a wild man all over the place. But he's a very, very smart fighter, and he came in and he took the emotion out of it and he fought a smart fight. Arnold Allen is a tough dude, right? Like, that is a tough dude. John Silva puts most people away, right? He just does, and he was going to put Diego Lopez away if he didn't get caught by that spinning elbow with him getting a little too overzealous. And Arnold Allen is a very, very dangerous dude and stood his ground and really landed some really, really good shots against John Silva in this one and really went toe-to-toe. This was a very clear decision win for John Silva in my eyes, but I thought Arnold Allen fought a really, really good fight in this one, but I just think the weaponry from John Silva is a little more diverse, right? I think Arnold Allen, it's just basic kicks, basic punches, and he's very, very good at it. He's got really, really good timing. I think he's a smart, intelligent fighter as well. But I just think that John Silva is a little more athletic. He possesses more power in his hands. You could tell when John Silva got hit by Arnold Allen, there wasn't the impact that there was when Arnold Allen would get hit by John Silva. So I think that John Silva just possesses more athleticism, more power, and more weapons in his arsenal in terms of the striking, the spinning elbows and such. And it really made for, it really gave him the edge because I thought in terms of intensity and footwork and cage control, this was a really, really even fight. I just think that it ended up being the more athletic, diverse striking one in this fight, and that was John Silva. So no disrespect to be shown towards Arnold Allen in this one. I thought it was a really phenomenal performance by him. And, I just think John Silva, like I keep saying, more athletic, more weapons, and it was fun to watch, man. It was fun to watch. Every John Silva fight's fun to watch. He's a madman, and the emotions come out immediately once the fight's over, and he's crying, and then he's barking, and it's the John Silva experience. He's going to move into the top 6 of the division, and okay, we're talking now, and that's big. That's big time because I think most people, including myself, believe that he was en route to beat Diego Lopez and that he's, rightfully, deservingly, should be in that tier of featherweights that everyone's talking about in the title conversation. Obviously, you've got Volkan Lopez fighting in a week for the belt. You've got Lerone Murphy, and you've got Movsar Evloev. And I think John Silva is a 5th guy that you can, throw into that picture. And I'm not saying he should be next for a title shot or he should have any more of a case for the title over a guy like Evloev or especially a guy like Lerone Murphy. But I just think that John Silva, we've seen it. So I do want to say this. John Silva is a very active fighter. He's a very, very active fighter. We've seen that he got brutally knocked out in September and he's already back in January. Typically, guys who get brutally knocked out like that, they take some time, and he came back and looked good. I think he's always been quite the active fighter. And I'm looking at it, this London card in March, no one's booked for it. And you got Lerone Murphy there, who kind of is the only UK guy to headline that card. That really makes sense right now. You are not headlining a card with the way Leon Edwards is fighting right now. Tom Aspinall, obviously you wouldn't. He's the champ, and he's hurt right now. Paddy Pimblett just fought tonight. So of the UK fighters, that's the one, is Lerone Murphy. And you either do Evloev or you do John Silva. And half the time Evloev doesn't show up. So if Evloev's not going to show up and this guy can make weight and be ready, I think John Silva versus Lerone Murphy in a title eliminator makes a ton of sense. And if, let's say, Volk beats Diego Lopez in a week, which fingers crossed he does. I love Diego Lopez. For the people on the program, you know how much I love Alexander Volkanovski. I'm the biggest fan of Volk in the world, and I'm going to be emotional train wreck tomorrow night. You will see me crying when I'm streaming this podcast a week from tonight. You will see me crying on live stream if I see Alexander Volkanovski cry. But anyways, if Volk ends up beating Lopez, and then you got John Silva with fighting Lerone Murphy for a chance to be the number one contender, fight next for the belt. I'd have no problem with him leapfrogging Diego Lopez, even though Lopez beat him, because Lopez will have had a title shot coming off of that win. So, featherweight's interesting, and it's in a really great spot right now. We've got a lot of young guys. We've got a lot of excitement, a lot of power, and I think it's really fun to watch. So, John Silva, great performance, and I think Arnold Allen is still going to be a mainstay in this division, and hopefully he can get more active. That's been the big issue with him, has been the activity as of recently, and I really, really hope that he can stay active because, 2024, he fought twice. He fought in January in Toronto, and then he fought in, in Manchester in July, and then he went a year and a half without a fight. He didn't fight in 2025. He didn't fight in the final half of 2024. So I hope he gets active because I think this is another guy who's shown he can compete with the best in the division. We haven't seen him get finished. He goes toe-to-toe with everyone. He arguably won that Movsar Evloev fight, and he fights anyone too, which is good for the brand. So, yeah. All right, we referenced it a little earlier. Final fight I want to talk about in depth. Not too long. Umar Nurmagomedov gets the win over Deiveson Figueiredo. The reason I said not too long is because there is really not much to talk about from this fight. Deiveson Figueiredo did not show up to this fight. He did not want to fight this fight. It felt like the entire time, instead of fighting his fight except for 10 seconds at the end of round 2, it felt like Deiveson Figueiredo wanted to be on his bike and just avoid getting taken down. And it almost felt like this was the result. The way Deiveson Figueiredo was fighting, this was the result he wanted. A decision victory in which he didn't really get taken down all that much. And you know what? That's fine. I feel for Umar Nurmagomedov. I'm not a huge Umar fan or anything, but I feel for this guy because it felt like his dance partner didn't want to dance tonight, and that really hurts his case at a title shot. If you got the Deiveson Figueiredo who fought those final 20 seconds, 30 seconds of round 2, or the Deiveson Figueiredo we've seen fight throughout his career, who shows up, throws bombs, brings the fight to you, I think Umar would have had a real chance to get a finish, to do something spectacular, and make the case over Sean O'Malley or anyone else at 135 to be next for the belt after the Merab Peter Yan rematch, whenever that is, assuming that's going to be in the next 3 to 4 months. But Deiveson Figueiredo didn't want to show up to this fight. And after the fight, there was a clip of Khabib and Islam and Umar on the bus, and they're basically saying that was easier than some of the sparring Umar does in camp in Dagestan. And honestly, I'm not in Dagestan, I'm not in their camps, but I can't disagree. Deiveson Figueiredo did not want to show up to this fight at all. So, it's hard to praise Umar because it was a good performance, right? His striking looked good. The wrestling is, we know what the wrestling is with Umar Nurmagomedov and all the Dagestanis, but he didn't have someone willing to engage with him. And it just felt like the entire fight, it was him, trying to cut off the cage, trying to find a way to get his hands on Figgy, and it just felt like his only impact was throwing the lead kick, which is so good. Umar's lead kick is so good, but that was the only thing that could land because Figgy was on his bike the entire fight. So, and I think we all knew Umar was the biggest favorite coming in on this card. I think we all knew that Umar, Figgy, this is going to be, a one-sided victory towards Umar. But I think Deiveson Figueiredo didn't even give himself a shot to win. He saw the odds and he said, yep, they're right, and I'm going to prove them right. And he just wanted to be on his bike the entire time. So this is more of an anti-Figgy rant, and that makes me sad because he's been such an entertaining, fun fighter throughout his career. But at this older stage in his career, it's just clear he's not the same fighter he once was at flyweight, knocking people over, getting into wars, and that sucks. That sucks, but that's the reality, unfortunately. So Umar gets a good win, and I think now 135, what do we do? In my opinion, you've got Sandhagen there, and I think we've wanted Sandhagen O'Malley for the longest time at the White House. That could be cool, but I think it makes sense to do Umar versus Sean. Now, is Sean going to take that? Probably not. And Sean is probably more in favor of getting the title shot next over Umar just because the UFC likes him more. He's more marketable, and okay, that's fine, but it sucks for Umar Nurmagomedov's case, and I think he even knows. He said it before this fight that he was going to have to probably win one more to get a title shot, and you know what? He's good, and he's as good as any 135er, so I trust in him to get a win and put himself back in that title conversation because that fight that I was at 12 months ago, him versus Merab would be amazing, man. It really would if they were able to run that back, and him versus Peter Yan would be an awesome, super skilled, well-rounded fight. I would pay anything. Peter Yan's such a fun fighter. I would pay anything to get Umar Nurmagomedov versus Peter Yan. And like I mentioned in my preview pod, that is like the perfect fight for the Abu Dhabi card that they always do, because those two guys are both Russian. You don't have to force someone to fly across the world to go fight Umar or Peter Yan in Abu Dhabi. Like, you can just do it there. So, yeah, the rest of the card, I mean, some weird stuff went on. Let's first, before we get to Alexander Hernandez and Michael Johnson and the whole debacle with that, let's talk Atibe Gauthier, who he gets a unanimous decision, but it was not what people thought it was going to be. It was not what people thought it was going to be. Andre Pulev really did fight a good fight. Against Atibe Gauthier. Excuse me if I'm saying that name wrong. And it was a good fight by Gauthier, but it was, throwing these bombs and stuff, and he was getting hit, and he was there to be hit. And it was very clear that his cardio was fine. He went 15 minutes, and he bled some, and he said afterwards, it's just red water. It's not a big deal. And it's like, oh, okay, dude. Okay, we're not going to disagree with you. You're a scary dude. Okay. It was a good performance, but, he was there to be hit. And I think more opponents will look at that now and go, okay, the lure of this prospect who's just killing everyone isn't as bad, because we've seen that defensively he's not the most defensively sound. He's an unbelievable athlete. He possesses unbelievable power, but defensively he is there to get hit, and Pulev did hit him in this one. Nikita Krylov got a buzzer beater KO against Modestas Bukauskas. Looked like the old Krylov, but definitely was locked in for this one. Alex Perez knocked out Charles Johnson. That sucked. Alex Perez is an awesome fighter. He's just had so many issues with pulling out of fights and missing weight, and he missed weight this week. Charles Johnson just was not fighting defensively sound, and the way he made Loner Kavanaugh pay back in November and on the Shanghai card was the exact same way that he paid in this one, which was keeping the hands down and just leaving the chin out there to be had. Josh Hokett got the win at heavyweight. That guy, cut the promo afterwards. He's an interesting fella, Josh Hokett is, and, he'll be there. Heavyweight's not a very deep division, and, regardless of the weird promos he's cutting and calling Brittany Griner a dude at the end of his promotion, whatever Brittany Griner beef he has, it was kind of funny. I won't lie. It was kind of funny. It was just so random. But, he's a name, and he's won 2 fights by knockout, and he won by knockout while flipping the guy off while the guy was basically retiring in the octagon. And then Ty Miller opened up the card. Ty Miller's got some hands, man. Golden Gloves winner. He's really long for welterweight, and he's got some hands, and he looked really, really good in this one. Although Bruce Buffer messing up the names, switching the name cards for Fuga and Ty Miller to start the card. We love you, Bruce, but that was a weird start to the card for sure. A rarity in Bruce Buffer's realm. So, speaking of Bruce Buffer, the whole this was the first Paramount card, and I wanted to give it a grade, and I'll just come out with it. I thought Paramount Plus, the very first card, I give it a strong B plus. I give it a strong B plus. I thought, for one, we're not paying for the card. This is the first ever pay-per-view, besides when I'm going to Buffalo Wild Wings, that I can watch on a big TV. I'm not stream Easton, or I don't have to pay $80 for. That made this awesome, and that made it obviously better. I saw a lot of people complaining about the commercials, and to those people that are complaining about the commercials, what other sport do you watch and there isn't commercials constantly? Right? Tomorrow is the NFC and AFC championships. There's going to be commercials all the time during those games. Are you going to complain about those? No, because you're getting those, not for free, but just as a part of a live TV package. If you're not going to charge $80 a pay-per-view, they got to make their money somehow. And most other, sports just make it through advertisements, and that's what they did. So there's no issues there. No issues there. So the people complaining about the ads, I'm not listening to you. Blah, 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 whatever. Some of my issues. The beginning of the broadcast was a little rough. Kate Scott, love her, Champions League host. I know football, UFC, that's this podcast. I'm a big soccer fan too. It's become one of the sports I've loved over the past year or two. Up the Chels, go Chelsea, baby. But Kate Scott is amazing. This was her first UFC event, so she messed up some names at the beginning of the broadcast. And then there were some truck issues in terms of while they were showing ads or promos for the fight, you could hear the background noise of the arena, stuff like that. But I thought the production was really, really, really good. The way that they opened up the main card, where they put the curtain around the octagon, they had the projector on it, and they showed the montage of the UFC from the very, beginning days all the way until now, and they showed all the iconic highlights that we know and love about this glorious sport. And, I thought that was awesome. And then they dropped it, and Bruce Buffer's in the middle, and he does the introduction. It's time for Paramount. Amazing. Amazing. And that's the stuff that this has been missing, because what makes the UFC so special, and the reason we all love it so much, is it is as close to like proper like entertainment as you're going to get for a true live sporting event. Like WWE is probably the closest thing to the UFC, realistically. And that's just, and the only reason it's not like the UFC is obviously because it's scripted, but WWE is the closest thing to the UFC in terms of just the spectacle of it all. And the UFC's done a great job. They've done the Sphere, they've done the different cards and the different promotions, going to these different arenas. They've done a great job making this an entertainment show, but it feels like Paramount, which is the home of many, many movies, many, many TV shows that we all know and love, really made this feel more like just as much like entertainment as it is a sport. And that, I love that. And I thought the whole curtain drop thing was amazing. And then, on top of that, I just thought that it was great production, right? Like, they had their kinks at the beginning, but I just thought it was really, really smooth. It didn't feel like they hadn't done a Paramount UFC event before. And I thought that was really, really good. My one nitpick, I was really hoping for a new score bug, or I don't know what it's called because there's not the score, but a new bug at the bottom that have the fighters' names and their trunk colors and all that stuff. I was really hoping for that. When UFC was originally Fox, and then when Fox got bought out by ESPN, that was when they introduced the graphics and stuff that we have now. There were some new graphics, especially when they'd like cut to break and stuff, but in terms of like the actual like score bug and the graphics that would pop up on screen mid-fight, all of it was the same, which did suck a little bit. And then, say what you will about the broadcast crew, Joe Rogan and DC and stuff, some people love them, some people hate them. I know a lot of people who hate them. I'm indifferent. I think Joe Rogan knows the game. He just, talks about leg kicks too much. DC, they probably need a striker in there. They're both, Rogan's a jiu-jitsu guy and DC is a wrestling guy, so it's hard for those guys to break down striking properly. But I think John Anik is as good as it gets in the UFC, and Megan O'Leary is as good as it gets in the UFC. And I don't mean like in the UFC specifically. I mean in sports broadcasting as a whole, and I just think that the UFC has them, and it's a blessing. And now they're getting Kate Scott, who's one of the best desk hosts in the game. So I'm really excited about it. Next week, Sydney, Australia, we'll see who's on the call for that and who's going to make the trip all the way to Australia. And yeah, the one last thing I want to talk about a little bit, and I referenced it a little bit, Michael Johnson, Alexander Hernandez. Weird. Obviously, this was a fight that was booked that I was really excited about. I know a lot of people were really, really excited about this fight on the prelims. Alexander Hernandez had a bunch of wins in a row, and they looked really, really good. Michael Johnson is kind of having a late career resurrection. And then the line, really a lot of money came in on Michael Johnson in the last 48 hours or so, and it got pulled. Dana White press conference, he said straight up, it got pulled because of the betting movement. The Gambling Association came to the UFC, and they pulled it immediately. I want to put this out there. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not going to, do all this. But as we know, Isaac Dolgarian, last year had the whole betting scandal where he basically threw the fight. We all kind of accept that he threw the fight against I forget who was Yader Deval or however you say his name, excuse me. And he basically threw the fight, and there was a bunch of money that came in on his opponent late, and then he got choked out and was defending the rear naked choke like no one ever defends a rear naked choke. That guy has fought out of the same gym as Alexander Hernandez, who was in this fight. And I would imagine if there was some throwing the fight type stuff going on, it would be on it would be Hernandez doing it, who was the guy who money was coming in on to lose, right? So if the money was coming in on Charles Johnson to win, that means that people, either there was an injury or there was some sort of inside information that told people, hey, this dude, he might be throwing the fight. And this is the fight more than any, this is the sport more than any other where this type of stuff can happen. And that's scary. So I give props to the UFC for pulling it. If it turns out if it was just weird betting movement and there was no slimy stuff going on behind the scenes, just rebook the fight in the next couple weeks or so, right? But Scary stuff. Scary stuff that the fact that this happened in Hernandez came from the same gym that Bulgarian went to. So that's my final rant on that one. I appreciate anyone being here. A little bit of a late pod, a little bit of a long pod. I apologize if I was not on my A game tonight. As you know, it's a little later. But tomorrow, NFC AFC Championship, I'll break that down with Game Time Gretch in the coming days. And then, UFC season, we're up and rolling again. UFC 325, Volk Lopez 2 is next week, UFC 325. I'll be there to preview it, react to it. You guys know the drill by this point. If anyone's here, I say it every episode, you're a psycho for being here till the end, but I absolutely love you and I absolutely appreciate you. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. If you're not following the Spotify, please do. And check out the Instagram and the TikTok. We're posting clips there daily, and that'll let you guys know when podcasts do drop instead of just, seeing it pop up in your YouTube or Spotify feed. But the schedule's pretty clear. These pods will come out after the cards on Saturday or at latest Sunday morning. The NFL pods will always come out a day or two after the games, and then the preview pods for UFC come out usually 2 days before the fights, and same thing with NFL, about 2 days before the fights. And as we go into NFL season, the content will, be less, but we'll talk free agency, we'll talk draft, we'll talk all the off-season movements, if you will. So I appreciate everyone being here. You're a psycho, but I love you. I'll see you guys later.